while the spotlight beamed on the West, far from the limelight, another chapter was quietly beginning. One that would sadly never make it to any of the, or rather, most of the history books out there. Hi, guys, welcome to Quiet Curiosities, a podcast where we dive deep into the rich history of India and possibly get you stories that are not as commercially available out there. My name is Soumya Srivastava, and I'm your host for today. And the story that I have for you today is going to make you really grateful about the medical history of India in a time where we didn't really have a lot of our own. Now, imagine a time when hearing the word diabetes didn't mean managing your diet or carrying a glucometer. It meant preparing for a certain death. Before 1921, diabetes was a slow fate, a brutal, irreversible decline. Doctors could do little but watch, helpless as their patients withered away. No insulin, no real treatment, just starvation diets, false hopes, and grief distressed up as like medicine. Then, in a quiet lab in Toronto, two scientists, Frederick Banting and Charles Best, changed everything that the world knew. They isolated insulin, a hormone buried deep in the pancreas, and in doing so, unlocked a lifeline. Suddenly, a diagnosis that had been a death sentence became something else entirely. A battle that could actually be fought, a life that could still be lived. The world erupted in celebration. Nobel Prizes, newspaper headlines, a new era in medicine had just begun. But while the spotlight beamed on the West, far from the limelight, another chapter was quietly beginning. One that would sadly never make it to any of the, or rather, most of the history books out there. Now let's travel back in time to Kolkata in 1923. Just 2 years after insulin's discovery, a small fragile shipment made its way into the hands of an Indian physician named Dr. J.P. Bose. Not to be confused with Jagdish Chandra Bose, the famous scientist. Well, this was a different man altogether. A clinical doctor, a quiet genius, a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and one of the few Indian physicians at that time with access to global medicine breakthroughs. So India in the early 1920s had no diabetic clinics, no medical infrastructure for hormone therapy. Most Indians hadn't even heard the word insulin. But Dr. Bose understood immediately what this delicate refrigerated vial meant. Hope. It really meant hope. He didn't wait for any policy to come in place. He didn't wait for funding or any fanfare. With care and caution, he began administrating insulin to his diabetic patients, making him one of the very first in Asia to do so. There was no press conferences, no celebrations, just lives being saved. He documented all of his results, shared them with colleagues, trained others in what he'd learned, all very quietly. All decades before India would actually catch up formally to the West. Because it wouldn't be until 1948, 25 years later, that India would open its first official diabetic clinic. That effort came from another visionary, Dr. M. Vishwanathan at Stanley Medical College in Chennai, now revered as the father of diabetology in India. By then, Dr. Bose had already paved the way ahead for diabetes in India. Though his name was fading into obscurity, not out of failure, but because he never asked to be remembered. He just did what needed to be done for his patients. And isn't that the most Indian kind of hero that we know of? Like, most of them are like quiet, unassuming, revolutionary, not in words, but actually in action. His story isn't taught in medical schools. You won't find his face in museum halls or even on stamps. But every time an insulin vial reaches the hands of a patient in India, every time someone survives diabetes, something that used to be very fatal once upon a time, his legacy lives on. So the next time you hear about Banting and Best, the discovery of insulin, and the miracle that followed, just pause for a moment and remember the man who brought that miracle to the Indian soil before it was news. Dr. J.P. Bose, a pioneer whose signature was not in ink, but in lives that he saved. Well, if you like this episode, follow us for more such history tidbits across India here on Quiet Curiosities. See you at the next episode.